I'd like to say my first hello to Ashay, who is the community rowing coach at London Youth Rowing and Thames Tradesmen Rowing Club. How are you doing, Ashay?
Not bad, thank you, Anne-Marie.
Good to see you. Next up, 22-year-old Maya Ford, who is a postgraduate student at Nottingham University and also a rower with Thames Rowing Club. How are you doing, Maya?
I'm good, thank you, Anne-Marie.
Good to see you. Good to see you. All the way in Nigeria, please welcome Donna Itabet, who is a former GB rower, now head of corporate finance at Babangona in Nigeria.
Hi, thanks, Anne-Marie.
Good to see you. Good to see you, Donna. And last but certainly not least, Mr. Christian Chimpong, who is a young rower who learned to row at the London Youth Programme. How are you doing, Christian?
I'm right, thank you.
Donna, I'm going to come to you about solutions, because I think we're all in agreement that it's very well talking about it, but we need to see action as well. And some actions have been done. I think it's a case of now taking it even up to a higher level than what it has ever been, particularly around the protests around the death of George Floyd and people wanting to see more change, more swifter action taken. So what can we do to make sure that sport progresses even further in the future?
So I think, definitely sort of sustained investment into sort of recognizing that we need to drive more diversity into sport, and proactive efforts over a sustained period of time is required in order to achieve that. So I think, multiple platforms, panels such as this that you're running now, Anne-Marie, the establishment of Love Rowing, the charity, to help drive more diversity and inclusion into the sport. That's a very recent development. I think they were only incorporated in 2019. And obviously COVID has sort of stalled some of the efforts in that space, but there are steps in the right direction. And I think, just having conversations such as this, like, as I mentioned earlier, not shying away from discussions about race, being able to talk about people not being embarrassed, and also and not trying to stay away from a cancel culture, trying to create an inclusive space where people feel they can ask these questions without sort of fear of retribution in case they get something a bit wrong or they're just a bit ignorant. So sort of people just being empathetic and understanding and having open discussions, whether it's like within your club, within your team, at your school, or like with your friends. I think it's just very important, and we're sort of on that path, but we just still have a long way to go.
And you talked about role models as well. How important are role models for rowing?
I think extremely important. So like for me, I look to my sister as a role model. I don't think if she hadn't already been on the GB rowing teams for the Beijing Olympiad, that I would have thought that was achievable for myself. There was a bit of sibling rivalry there in the sense that I was like, oh, well, if my sister could do it, of course I can do it. But I think it's just very important for lots of people who are sort of the more grassroots level of the sport to be able to look up and see people who are actually celebrated at having to achieve great things. So, having won the 2016 World Championships, I was the first person of color for GB rowing to do that. And, so sort of more noise probably should be made about it. And so that would help to inspire people in the sport. And I like to look to tennis, and you mentioned the Williams sisters earlier. I believe their dominance of the sport over the last 20 years is what has helped lead to this new generation of female tennis players of color who are doing so well now. So Coco Gauff, Naomi Osaka, so Stevens, they definitely sort of helped, I'm sure, this younger generation when it might have been very difficult, or they didn't think they could succeed, or they were coming across all these microaggressions that were just making it really tough. But it would have been so much easier for them to say, okay, look, I can achieve this because I see the Williams sisters have done it and can do it. So why can't I?
Dinesh, I'm going to come to you. You've talked about friendlier spaces. I know that British Rowing have got a guide for all the clubs around the country to make their spaces more inclusive, more friendly. How far should we go with this? Is it a case of inviting people from the local community to the rowing club so they can see how it operates and how it works? Would that be a good step forward?
Yes, I think clubs are sort of a good environment to perhaps look at some of the solutions and maybe looking at complementary roles that external communities can come in and be a part of. So perhaps during like big days such as the boat race, you've got so many communities that surround where the race takes part. It's maybe looking to the external communities and inviting them to be a part of the spectacle and the sport, and maybe just like looking at the roles clubs can play in order to like aid and like multiple communities to be part of the sport.
And what about social media, Tinashe? Is that a tool that could be used to encourage more people from the community to get involved in the sport?
Yeah, I think social media, everyone's involved, and in terms of Donna was saying, in terms of the stories that sort of reside within the rowing communities of people of color doing great things that are not told enough, social media is like a big it's a big way of tackling that. You can get across a story really well in no amount of time, and there's so many good stories, I'm pretty sure, that reside within the rowing world of people of color doing great things that are not told.
Maya, you've done something quite unique. You got in touch with the chairperson, I believe his name is Mark Davis, on the subject. How did that come about?
Yeah, it was around the time when everything was kind of kicking off on social media about Black Lives Matter, and rowing has been something I've been very passionate about for a while now, and I thought, why not just get in contact, because I've always thought about the sport not being diverse, and what better way to kind of do something about it than to go directly to British Rowing. So yeah, I just sent an email explaining my thoughts, and maybe some steps British Rowing could take to kind of set an example for British rowing clubs on how to be more diverse. I think it's very different when you're hearing it from someone's perspective, instead of kind of theorizing about, why is there a lack of diversity? What are the social factors that might, this was like my personal experience, and it was about very personal things that happened to me at rowing clubs. Nothing terrible, but again, just kind of microaggressions that are just, and I just think that highlighting that to British Rowing, I just wanted to show like this is what Black individuals might experience at rowing clubs on a daily basis. What do you think?
And what was the response back?
I got a good response back, actually. It was kind of saying, we are taking steps, we are looking to hire more BAME individuals for roles like committee roles, that kind of thing. And also there was kind of, I think there was a bit of, it's hard to get the tone across in an email, but it did sound as if when the chair replied, a lot of that information was new to him. Like when I was talking about my experiences, he was saying, wow, I didn't know that was a thing that could happen. It's really interesting to hear your thoughts. So yeah, I think it was definitely useful to send that email.
Somebody that you talked about before is Ashay Cooper, who has got an absolutely fantastic story. Tell us a little bit about him.
Yeah, so I'm ashamedly haven't read his book yet or seen the film, but yeah, he is from Chicago and he got into rowing, and it's basically, I think his book is about getting into the sport, coming from a place where gang rivalry was rife, and it's about him and his friends and how the sport kind of saved them and gave them something to work towards in the face of that adversity. And yeah, he again, I think, got in contact with me through Instagram. We were talking about diversity and like comparing British versus US rowing, just having really interesting conversations, and he was really supportive. He asked to read my email and said like, good on you. So it's just nice to know that globally this is a thing that is, he's doing things in the US, they're having the conversations, we're having the conversations here, like it's all looking like steps taken in the right direction.
Just to highlight from that, so it would be great, Maya, if that conversation you had with Ashay sort of precipitated World Rowing picking up on his documentary and sort of, I came across Ashay and his documentary through a post from World Rowing on Instagram, and I just thought it was fantastic that World Rowing, a fairly non-diverse sport, was really pushing this out. And I was, so I was just really excited I've seen the movie. I'd spoken to Ashay, spoken on one of his panels for Love Rowing, which was a few weeks ago. And so it just kind of shows the importance of like everybody's role and sort of driving this conversation and getting the message out there. So, you know, so as Maya said, it's sort of how rowing saved them and how boys from different gangs actually sort of were able to find peace through the sport of rowing, away from sort of all the distractions and trauma of sort of growing up in the city of Chicago, where there's just a lot of gun violence. And, you know, and the main thing that's sort of highlighted in that documentary was that growing up with that trauma, actually a much higher percentage of children growing up in that environment suffer high levels of PTSD than soldiers that go to war. And soldiers that go to war get a lot of the emotional support required, but all these kids kind of grew up not getting that. But it was amazing for them to say that rowing has actually helped to give them some of that emotional support and peace that allows them to live, you know, their best lives and live the, you know, and learn lessons that sort of have allowed them to lead better lives now.
And he's 100% a role model, 100%. And it's nice because he's not kind of like doing under 23 trials or anything. Like, he's an older man, him and his mates, they're older men, they're 100% role models for younger people. And it's in film, it's in a book form that's accessible. People really can hear his story.
And I watched the trailer actually, and what struck me about the trailer is when they talk about when they get into the water, they just have a sense of peace. Just for a few minutes with everything that's going on around them when they're back on land. When they're in the water, it's just them and the boat and nobody else, and all just working together as a team, despite the differences that Donna's talking about, because they're two different gangs, two rival gangs that are coming together to sit in a boat. And I just found that's quite emotional, really, just knowing that the water just acts as that, just gives them that space, if you like. It's a fascinating story.
It strips everything else away and actually just shows everyone's just human. Everyone's just, you know, trying to live their best, happiest life. And there's all these factors that try and make it difficult. But when we just like strip everything away, you know, we're just like human beings, and we all have a job to sort of make everybody to you know, try and live happy lives, happy, peaceful lives.
Yeah, absolutely. Christian, what would you like to see as solutions to encourage more people of colour to get involved in the sport?
That's a good question. I feel as though there needs to be like local boathouses need to reach out to schools more. So Fulham Reach did a good job in doing it, and I feel like more boat clubs can be making this effort, and also educating students on this, like educating, students on the sport too as well, and just and so they can gain a proper understanding of the sport. Because when I ended up talking to some people at my school after they tried it, they had mentioned that like they didn't really see the point in it, or they didn't quite understand the sport properly. And they felt as though it wasn't like, compared to like the sports they would normally play, like rugby or football, it just didn't quite match up for them, which was interesting. But I feel as though with like proper education of the sport, and like perceptions of the sport can be changed. And I also feel as though, it's a good question. I feel as though, just having more welcoming events as well. So for example, as was mentioned before, with events like the boat race, opening up to communities, inviting students and people in of all backgrounds. I feel as though there was a lot of outreach of indoor rowing, which was really good. So a lot of people my age, well, at the time, everyone was getting into indoor rowing. It was really fun and it was really cool. That was kind of like an introductory, it kind of got people a bit more familiar with the idea of the sport. And I feel as though if we pushed rowing, like on the water rowing as much as indoor rowing, I feel as though we could get the same response, especially if people in like areas, boroughs around, like around the Thames as well. So for example, the Hammersmith and Fulham area, etc.
And it's also about, Christian, I would say, pushing it outside the M25 as well. England and Wales, you know, England, Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland is one country, is one. And it is a case of getting outside of being, you know, the southeast, isn't it? And it's, you know, pushing the message that rowing is for everybody, regardless what part of the country you live in.
Yeah, that is true. Opening up to everyone is very important. Because I even like know like people in like small communities or like in schools would like try and organize transport and things like that to allow rowing to happen. But I feel as though there is a larger or more organized effort. Or even if, for example, British Rowing were to like host a thing, like were to say, for example, if British Rowing were to have like a program in which people can reach out to British Rowing and then get funding or support in promoting rowing in their areas, that could potentially work. So maybe it's a program in which they like provide funding and support and resources so that they can get anyone in schools to get into rowing or things like that, or to start their own boat clubs, or like have partnerships with boat clubs.
Tokyo 2021. Goodness, it's going to be around the corner.
Sorry, do you mind?
Go on,
Anne-Marie, if I I just had an idea sort of around that. So I think sort of to help drive sort of like more people to sort of like view rowing as an option for them, I think a lot is to do with the perceived competitiveness of rowing. You go into clubs and it's very much like got 2K tests, who can lift the heaviest weights, who can go the fastest. And that's not necessarily sort of what everyone is looking to get out of a sport. And actually, I don't think that's all that rowing has to offer, because, you know, it's an extremely beautiful sport. When you go in the water and the sun's just rising and the clouds are reflecting off the water and you can hear the birds and you can hear the water rushing by, it's extremely peaceful and extremely meditative. And I think a lot of people can sort of benefit from that side of rowing that's not necessarily needs to be about how fast you can go in the boat. So, you know, just an idea I had would be, you know, if you could almost have a clear-cut division of clubs, you know, because right now it's just every club has its different sort of culture. Some are more social, some are more competitive. But if you're new to rowing, it's going to be quite daunting to actually figure out where you fit in. So whether like clubs themselves will make a special effort to, you know, have a social club and then the competitive club side, or whether you have like a division across the clubs where, okay, you know, if you're at Thames and you're Imperial, you're on tier 1. If you're in these other clubs, you're tier 2. And sort of like just knowing that when you go into the club, that not necessarily it's not about the fastest erg or like, you know, how many training sessions you can make. Maybe you just show up on a Saturday afternoon and sort of like you have there's a social outing and there's no pressure there. So I think opening up rowing to sort of different types of outcomes, whether it's just more recreational and enjoyment, or whether it's more competitive and, you know, trying to get to Henley Royal, I think there's a responsibility of the clubs to sort of make room for those two different audiences.
Tokyo 2021, as I said, is not going to be too far away now. Tinashe, how do you think the sport can maximise the effect of Tokyo 2021, particularly seeing the results of London 2012 when Seasway won that gold medal as part of the South African team?
I think, in the sort of interesting environment that sport is taking now, I think, a sport like rowing can use this chance to highlight the sport for everyone to get involved, but, you know, not just as a form of competitiveness, but perhaps to use it as part of other sports, perhaps. I don't know, it's just a small idea of mine. As you look at sort of like the cross-pollination of sports with stuff like triathlons, I think it's probably a good chance to like reimagine the sport. So to push it as a chance for everyone to get involved. So you've got stuff like CrossFit that happens. I think, I think it's a good chance to push the sport as something that can be reimagined, you know, perhaps at an elite level, but also on a local level.
Just going on from what you said, I think a lot of rowers anyway do multiple sports. I can see your bike and Ashay in the back there.
It's
it's just how it is. Like a lot of rowers cycle, a lot of rowers run, a lot of rowers swim, and it's just about it would just be so lovely if we get more people of color just doing, like, not feeling as though they have to come into it with this competitiveness, with something to prove that they should be there. It should just be a holistic thing. Everyone should just be enjoying it, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like I think right now is probably the perfect time to sort of push like an initiative like that where rowing can cross-pollinate into other sports, because you can see a lot of people. Yeah, you can see a lot of people. Even like if you look at the national team, they like do these sort of cycling training in the desert in Spain somewhere or something like that. But you can see it happens already. But yeah, it's time maybe like to reimagine the sport, to like and then just pull in other communities and just break the sort of the what seems to be a binary sort of competitive element
Yeah.
to it. And yeah, just like,
I think that would attract a lot of like-minded people anyway, because I know there's like the Black Cyclist Network happening in London, and like other kind of people of colour with their own networks. I think, yeah, it should all just join together.
Actually, that's a good point, Maya. Christian, I'll come to you about that. Do you think there should be some, particularly as we're going into Olympics next year, do you think there should be some sort of network for Black rowers? Would that benefit you?
I feel like initially it will benefit. It will be a good benefit because initially it will be beneficial because it allows us to kind of connect with others in the sport, and it will help motivate everyone. I feel as though going forward though, it shouldn't be a permanent solution, because then at that point you'd want to focus on integrating everyone so that everyone's in one big community. So I feel like initially it will be something good to have in place, but then as time goes on, and once we have more like a larger presence of different backgrounds in rowing, then we should kind of just focus on making everyone a large community rather than keeping everyone separate.
Donna, how can we use the Olympic year as a motivator to maximize the potential of getting people of color involved in the sport?
So I think sort of London 2012, London very much benefited from the Olympics, being in home base. And I think that sort of definitely a lot of clubs across the country saw uptick in sort of people interested in like signing up for membership. So, the fact that it's going to be taking place all the way in Tokyo, so I think a little bit more effort will be required in terms of like televising the events, hopefully on a group level, sort of like pandemic permitting, and sort of just like, and then sort of really driving, a new I can't think of the word right now, recruitment effort, in terms of like, attracting people who like see the people in the water and just inspired by that performance and sort of like want to take it. But sort of, going back to what we were saying about a sustained effort to help drive diversity into the sport, it can't taper off, a year or after 2 years if they're not seeing the results. You need to go into the schools, you need to continue the dialogue, you need to sort of show people that you're interested on a long-term basis, because I think what Maya, maybe Christian, were alluding with some of the programs, you get a lot of attention in terms of the recruitment process, but then once you're in, you're sort of like left to your own devices. And I think these programs need to really recognize that, a bit of additional support and pastoral care is required for people of diverse backgrounds who are operating in a very much white space. And for some people, it's easier to navigate than others. And you need to recognize that some people may need additional help, or, even just the conversation, to make sure they're not feeling a bit lost, and then you don't disenfranchise them, and then suddenly all the effort that you put in at the beginning like comes to waste because you sort of were not putting enough effort into like maintaining and addressing reasons why people may drop off.
Guys, I'm going to now bring this conversation to a close because we're bringing it to full circle. So we've talked about your journeys, your experiences, the barriers as well, solutions, the Olympic Games, which I think is going to be very, very key for next year. I'd like to come to each of you and just get that one takeaway message that you want to give, and also why everybody, particularly a Black person, should get involved in the sport. Let's start with you, Maya.
My takeaway message is just go for it. It's just do it. You decide how much you want to commit. I don't think you should be stressed about how many sessions you can make. If you want to do 2 a week, that's absolutely fine. I think you will just reap all of the rewards just from being on the water in that calm space. So just go for it.
Donna?
So there's so many reasons to get into it. I think one, actually, to launch on top of what Christian was saying in terms of, having support into the sport, sort of convincing parents who won't necessarily see rowing as a path to a good job or education. You're just really highlighting the fact that, it does introduce structure, it does introduce discipline. And also, if you're a good student and you're rowing, there are lots of scholarship opportunities, especially in the US, for you to get a full scholarship. And that would very much tick the boxes that your parents would prefer the path for you to take while you're still going along the sport. So I would, so do your research, and definitely sort of would encourage anyone that, and not necessarily if you don't think you have the physiology, still go for it. You don't need to be 6 foot and 180 pounds to be able to get into the sport. Lots of people who sort of been varying points of the spectrum of what an athlete should be, they've still been extremely successful. And so, as Maya said, just go for it.
Tinashe?
For me, I would say one reason to definitely get into rowing is you can definitely broaden your understanding of the value of many things in sport. But I think, having looked around in terms of people who partake in the sport, they see a certain value that they take away from the sport. And I think for Black people, Black rowers, I think, there's definitely a lot to uncover in terms of what they can bring and what they can get out from the sport.
And last but not certainly least, Christian, last word for you.
I feel as though rowing is a sport that promotes both physical fitness and mental fitness as well. It's a sport that develops a resilient mindset, and I feel that that's very important to have. And I feel as though, it's definitely worth it, and it's something that will stay with you even if you stop rowing. It was something that definitely stays with you, that resilient mindset, and I feel like that's very important.